If you looked at us from the outside, you'd think we were the perfect couple. I remember the early days with Anna, late-night takeout on the living room floor, laughing at jokes only the two of us understood, her head on my shoulder as we watched movies we'd both seen a dozen times. Our friends would say we had that rare, easy chemistry, effortless and honest, the kind that makes you believe in meant to be. We built our lives together steadily, gathering small traditions like weekend coffee runs, Sunday walks through the park, birthday surprises, and private little rituals only we seemed to enjoy. In photos, she was the one leaning into me, and I had this look like I couldn't believe my luck. To be honest, neither could I. She made everything feel lighter, the world, my anxieties, even my own flaws. For years, I trusted that warmth. Anna once told me I was her best friend, and I believed her without reservation. I never questioned if that was enough. As we settled into the rhythm of marriage, our days blended gently into each other. Mornings started with small kisses and sleepy greetings. Evenings ended talking about our days, sometimes side by side in the kitchen, other times unwinding on the balcony. There was comfort in our routine. I thought it was the kind of comfort people spent their whole lives searching for. We shared burdens naturally. If my work overwhelmed me, she listened. If she had a rough day, I brought her favorite pastry or just held her hand quietly. Sometimes we dreamed out loud about taking a big trip, buying our own place, growing old together. I guess that's why I never saw it coming. I believed in us completely, in the world we'd built within the shelter of our shared habits. Even now, looking back, I remember feeling a simple happiness, convinced that any cracks that appeared would be small ones, easy to fix, nothing that could ever shake the foundation. I never imagined the day would come when I'd start questioning everything. It started small. So small I almost missed it. Anna became quieter at the dinner table, distracted in ways I hadn't seen before. She'd scroll absently through her phone, not always smiling at my jokes the way she once did. Our conversations, once playful and easy, felt a little forced. If I tried to ask about her day, she'd brush it off as boring or busy, quick to change the subject. She started coming home a little later, saying something about extra meetings or traffic, but her stories never had the detail they used to. Before, she would tell me every odd thing that happened at work, every annoying email, every small victory. Now there were more silences, more "it was nothing" answers. I assumed she was stressed, so I let it go, not wanting to push her. I just told myself that we all go through phases, that she'd tell me what was really going on when she was ready. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more the gaps became obvious. She'd leave her phone face down on the table, something she never used to do. At night, I caught her texting in the bathroom, the door locked behind her, a habit that felt out of place in our open, familiar home. She started paying extra attention to how she looked, even on days when she said she had nothing planned. I woke up once to find her curling her hair at 6 a.m, more effort than usual for an average Thursday. I asked if she was meeting someone from work, and she just smiled, saying it made her feel better to look nice for herself. Even our routines shifted. Weekend breakfast, a ritual we always shared, suddenly became something she wanted to skip or rush through. She would leave before I got up, saying she had errands to run or needed some alone time. Each new change was small, almost unremarkable on its own, but together they settled into the back of my mind as a quiet, persistent discomfort, a whisper that something beneath the surface had changed. I didn't know what to do about it yet, so I did nothing, waiting and hoping the familiar warmth would return all on its own. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. We all have bad weeks, I reasoned, and maybe Anna was just under pressure, maybe she needed space, and I just had to trust her. But the doubts kept piling up, quietly nagging at me, even when I tried my best to ignore them. I started noticing more patterns, like how she would always have her phone on her, never letting it out of her sight, not even when she took out the trash or stepped into the shower. She used to hand it to me without a second thought whenever she wanted me to look at a picture or reply to someone for her. Now she acted cagey, keeping her screen hidden, turning the sound down low. I tried not to make a big deal out of it, not wanting to seem paranoid. Still, there was a tightness in my chest whenever she left the room, a nervous energy I couldn't shake off. I found myself lying awake at night, going over every conversation in my head, replaying the last few months, and searching for clues I might have missed. I wanted to demand the truth right then. Ask her if there was someone else. Demand to see her phone. Force an answer no matter how painful it might be. But I held back. Confrontation is easy when you're blinded by anger, but I didn't want to act on suspicion alone. What if I was wrong? What if she really was just tired and distant because of work, and my doubts only made things worse between us? So I decided to wait, to watch, to keep track of the little things, without letting on that anything was different. It felt like torture, pretending everything was fine when in truth, every touch, every laugh, every moment felt tinted by that growing sense of unease. I was scared, not just of what I might find, but of what my suspicion might do to our relationship. So for the first time, I kept my fears to myself, hoping desperately that my silence would give her the space to come back to me on her own. It was in the small things that the truth began to show itself. Little cracks in the story we told each other every day. Anna used to be a terrible liar. Or maybe I just never gave her a reason to be. I started noticing inconsistencies, tiny details that didn't add up when I replayed our conversations in my mind. One evening, she mentioned running into an old friend while shopping, but later, when I asked about it casually, she hesitated, then changed the story, saying it was actually someone from work she bumped into, not an old friend. At first, I thought maybe I misheard, so I let it go, but once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. Anna started forgetting things she'd told me or gave explanations that sounded rehearsed, quick answers delivered with too bright a smile, as though she'd practiced ahead of time. If I pushed for more details, she'd get defensive or act offended at my curiosity. She'd say she worked late, but when I brought up her boss or project, her answers were vague or didn't line up with what she'd said before. The weekends hurt the most. Anna would suddenly have plans that didn't include me, vague errands, or meeting up with a friend from college she hadn't mentioned earlier in the week. She'd leave the house dressed up more than usual, with no clear reason. Sometimes I'd ask about her day when she got home, and she'd give me a summary so thin it barely made sense. A coffee here, a quick lunch there, no specifics. I asked once what movie she'd seen with her friend, and she paused too long before replying with the title of a film I knew she hated. I watched her talk, her eyes shifting, her voice slightly too cheerful, and that old feeling of intimacy was replaced by something sharp and cold. My trust in her, once unshakable, began to feel like a thread stretched too tight, ready to snap. I wanted so badly to believe the stories, to accept the version of reality she was selling me, but the lies, small as they were, felt loud and obvious, echoing in every quiet moment we shared. One night, we were sitting on the couch after dinner, each pretending to watch the TV. Anna was scrolling through her phone, half engaged, while I just sat there, thinking about how silent our living room felt. I tried to break the tension with some small talk, mentioning a new cafe I'd seen on my way home from work. She perked up, suddenly animated, saying she'd been there a couple of days ago with her friend Liz. Anna described the place in detail, the decor, the iced coffee she'd tried, the cozy chairs by the window. She said they'd talked there for hours, catching up like old times. Her voice was light, but it didn't quite ring true. There was something almost too perfect about the way she remembered everything, a rehearsed feeling to her words, as if she were reciting a well-learned part instead of recalling a real memory. Later that evening, I happened to run into Liz's husband, Matt, while picking up some groceries. We exchanged the usual small talk, and I casually mentioned how Anna and Liz had been at that cafe together. Matt looked genuinely confused and told me Liz was out of town that whole week, visiting her sister after a family emergency. Hearing that, I felt something inside me drop, a cold, sinking realization that Anna's careful story was starting to unravel. When I got home, she didn't expect me to follow up. I played along, not letting her see my disappointment or the questions pounding in my head. But her mistake was clear to me now. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was evidence. A solid piece of truth buried in her careless slip. Suddenly, all those tiny doubts weren't just in my mind. She'd slipped up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I kept quiet, I'd hear even more cracks in her carefully tended web of lies. After that night, I started paying more attention to the patterns in Anna's schedule. She'd always been the type to keep a routine, heading out and coming home at more or less the same times, week in and week out. But now, things became different. She was suddenly staying out much later than usual, sometimes with little to no warning. She'd send a quick text around 6 or 7 telling me she had to wrap up a project or was catching a quick bite with a friend from work. The tone of her messages was casual enough, but I could sense something missing, a certain warmth maybe, or just the feeling that she was thinking about me at all. I stared at those messages late at night, growing more familiar with the emptiness they left behind. Sometimes she'd get home tired, quietly tucking herself into bed beside me without much conversation. Other nights, she'd be more upbeat, almost as if nothing had changed at all. But it never quite reached her eyes. I started keeping track of how often she left and how late she got back, writing the times down in a notebook I kept hidden in my desk. Each entry felt heavy, another piece of evidence that I couldn't ignore. I watched as she spent longer in front of the mirror before leaving, sometimes putting on perfume she normally saved for special occasions. I stopped asking who she was meeting because the answers felt thin and distant, more like rehearsed lines than real explanations. My imagination painted ugly pictures, but I kept them locked away in my mind, determined not to let my pain show. There was a night she came back well past midnight, saying she lost track of time with her coworkers after a stressful week. I just nodded, pretended to scroll through my phone, my mind replaying every word she said. The later she stayed out, the wider the distance grew between us. It was as if we were living parallel lives, only crossing paths out of habit, while the foundation of trust I'd counted on began to quietly crack beneath my feet. The anxiety kept building until one evening, sitting together on the couch, temptation got the best of me. Anna had left her phone sitting right beside her on the coffee table as she got up to fix herself a drink. For a moment, I stared at the phone, heart pounding, every muscle tense. I told myself it would be just a quick glance. Nothing too invasive, just enough to convince myself that I was worrying over nothing. As my hand inched closer to the device, Anna returned almost instantly, her footsteps quicker than usual. She slid across the room with her usual gentle smile, but there was a tightness I hadn't noticed before. Before I could so much as pick it up, she gracefully reached the table and picked up her phone, making it look effortless and casual. She was smooth, too smooth. She told me she needed her phone to check a recipe for the drink she was making, giving a light laugh as she tapped her screen. The moment drifted past like nothing had happened, but I felt the weight of it long after she'd gone back into the kitchen. It wasn't what she'd said that hit me, it was the way her hand didn't even tremble, the voice that was too even, too relaxed, as if she'd expected me to reach for the phone. I watched her pretend to scroll, watched her hold the phone closer to her body than she ever had before. The message was clear, even if it remained unspoken. Whatever secrets the phone held, they weren't mine to see. That perfect ease I thought we shared was suddenly replaced by a quiet, careful distance. If she had nothing to hide, there would have been no need for the small act of guarding her phone. I sat there, staring at the place where the device had rested, understanding for the first time how invisible walls can rise up between two people who once felt like one. I said nothing to her, but inside, my suspicions grew roots, and I realized that knowing the truth might come at a cost I wasn't sure I was strong enough to pay. It's hard to describe the kind of pain you feel when you suspect the person you love is hiding something. I started carrying the weight everywhere I went. At work, I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought, replaying every little moment between Anna and me. I became quiet around my friends, no longer interested in their everyday stories because my mind was somewhere else. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, wondering if what I felt was just some kind of insecurity or jealousy, or if there really was something serious going on. There were evenings when Anna was home, moving around the apartment with that familiar grace, and I'd watch her from the corner of my eye, searching for any sign that might tell me what was really happening. I stopped asking questions because I was scared of the answers. I tried to convince myself to just let it be, to trust her. But the doubt grew louder in my head, echoing in every empty space. My chest felt heavy all the time. I wanted to talk to someone about it. ask a friend or a family member for guidance, but I was ashamed. Ashamed to voice out loud that maybe my marriage wasn't what I thought it was, that maybe I'd missed the warning signs or had been blind to her growing distance. I felt trapped between wanting to believe her and not wanting to be made a fool of. I'd lie awake for hours, thinking of every way this could turn out. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe this was all in my head. Or maybe I was about to uncover something I'd never recover from. There were nights when I resolved to confront her, to lay everything out. But when morning came, I'd lose my nerve. The thought of her denying everything, or worse, confirming it, kept me frozen. I was lost in a place between anger and heartbreak, torn between the urge to fight for the truth and the fear of tearing everything apart if I did. One evening, the opportunity I hadn't dared to imagine suddenly appeared. Anna came home exhausted and tossed her bag onto the armchair, her phone slipping out in the process. She didn't even notice. She just kicked off her shoes, told me she was going for a quick shower, and disappeared into the bathroom with the door shut behind her. I stared at that phone, my pulse racing so fast I felt almost dizzy. For a few seconds, I battled with myself. Should I look, or would that just make me as untrustworthy as the person I feared she'd become? But in the end, my need for answers was too strong. My hands shook as I reached for her phone. To my relief, she didn't have it locked with a fingerprint or Face ID, so I was able to open it. I told myself I'd only check her messages, nothing more. At first, everything looked normal. Family group chats, work conversations, the usual memes. But then I found a thread with a name I'd never seen before. Something about the way they spoke made my stomach clench. Familiar, intimate, full of teasing and inside jokes. I scrolled further and the words became more than friendly. It was all too obvious. Talks about meeting after work, about how much they missed each other, little details about things Anna and I used to share. There were just enough careful words to avoid direct evidence, but the context made it clear this was more than a simple friendship. One message caught my eye. She wrote that she had to make up another excuse tonight, but it's worth it just to see you. She even sent a photo of herself smiling in a cafe I'd never heard her mention before. It was like reading about a stranger's life, one that had somehow crept into my own home. I felt cold and numb. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, to end the torture, but I knew if I exploded without a plan, she'd shut down and twist it all back on me. So I put her phone back exactly where it was, like nothing had happened, and sat there in the half-darkness of our living room, with the evidence burning a hole in my heart. The final blow didn't come from a message, but from a single photo. I remember that night perfectly. The chill in the air, the quiet hum of the apartment while Anna was in the other room. I could have left it alone, but curiosity mixed with pain made me open her phone once more when I had the chance. I thought I was prepared for anything, but what I found hit me harder than I'd ever expected. It was buried in her gallery, tucked between work screenshots and random selfies. There, right in the middle, was a picture of Anna and a man I'd never seen before. They were close. Too close for comfort. Sitting side by side at a table in a dimly lit restaurant. Her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in months. Her smile was wider than any she'd shown me recently. He was leaning into her, their hands almost touching as if caught in some wordless agreement. There was no room for doubt or hopeful misunderstanding. It was intimate, unmistakably so. I stared at that picture for what felt like hours. All the little moments, the late nights, the meetings and errands, all came flooding back to me at once. I was frozen, like my heart had stopped, and all the breath was knocked out of my body. That photo was more than proof. It was a turning point, the thing that shattered any illusion I'd held on to about us being okay. I felt anger, sure, but mostly a deep, staggering grief, a sense of loss for the life I thought we had, for the woman I thought I knew. For a moment, I wanted to erase the photo, delete the memory, pretend I'd never seen it, but I knew that would only be hiding from the truth, and the truth was now a heavy, permanent weight inside me. I set the phone down, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what came next. There was no going back, no more room for false hope. The evidence was right there, staring back at me, and I understood that everything was about to change. After that night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I didn't let on that anything had changed. I acted as if I was still the same clueless, trusting husband, going through our routines just like before. I hid my pain deep under a mask of normalcy. Every morning, I greeted Anna with a smile, poured her coffee, and talked about our days ahead. I asked the usual questions, listened politely, and nodded along, just like I always had. If she was in a hurry to leave or seemed distracted, I didn't say a word. Instead, I treated her the way I used to, even after seeing that photo and reading those messages. It felt almost like living in a play, pretending everything was okay while inside, my world was falling apart. It was harder than I'd expected. Every smile, every kind word felt forced and empty. But somehow, the act of pretending gave me a strange sense of control. She had no idea that I knew, and that gave me time to breathe, to think, and to plan. I noticed her relaxing back into her old habits, less guarded now that she believed my suspicions were gone. She began to move through life with a lighter step, laughing at my jokes again, reaching for my hand at dinner. Maybe she thought I'd stopped noticing. Or maybe she just felt safer inside the lie she'd built. Some nights she'd linger in conversation, looking me in the eyes as if nothing in the world could shake us. There were moments when I almost believed her act myself. But every touch, every quick glance at her phone, every casual excuse to leave the room, reminded me what was really happening. I forced myself to play along, knowing that if I confronted her now, she'd only twist things or deny it all. By pretending, I kept the advantage. I could see everything clearly, while she remained in the dark. And in that space between truth and pretense, I began to find a strange, unexpected power. With every passing day, my mind grew sharper and colder. I realized I needed to think ahead, to stop reacting with pain, and instead move carefully, with purpose. I started planning, but not in the way most people expect. There would be no yelling, no dramatic confrontations. I wanted the truth to be exposed, but on my terms, and with no way for Anna to twist things around. I knew that if I played my cards right, I could force her to show her true colors in a way she couldn't escape. First, I began gathering small pieces of proof, careful notes of dates, times, and the names I'd seen in her messages. I looked for patterns, for slip UPS in her stories. I took quiet notice of her mood shifts, the strange calls, the excuses that didn't add up. It felt almost clinical at times, as though I was dissecting someone else's life. But that distance was what gave me the clarity I needed. I read about other people who dealt with betrayal, took mental notes from their stories, and began sketching out a plan in my head. Instead of letting my pain rule me, I used it as fuel to stay patient and watchful. My goal wasn't just to catch Anna in a lie. I wanted her to see, without any shadow of a doubt, that she had underestimated me, that her betrayal couldn't remain hidden forever. I started thinking about what would feel most just, not just for me, but for the truth itself. The idea took shape slowly. I would orchestrate a moment where she would reveal herself, not because I forced the confession, but because she'd be faced with undeniable proof in front of someone who mattered. I envisioned a situation where she let her guard down, thinking she'd gotten away with everything, until the evidence, all quiet and plain, came out in the open. It would be subtle but powerful, leaving no space for denial or manipulation. In the silence of my own mind and the loneliness of those endless nights, I felt myself grow stronger, shifting from hurt and confusion to a deep, focused resolve. During this time, I met someone new through a mutual connection at work. His name was Eric, and on the surface, he seemed like just another friendly acquaintance. Eric and I started talking during breaks, grabbing the occasional coffee together and swapping stories about our lives. He was sharp, attentive, and good at reading people. The more I got to know him, the more I realized he wasn't just a casual friend. There was a depth to his conversations, a way of asking questions that made me feel both seen and understood. At first, I didn't share much about what was happening at home, but Eric had a way of drawing people out. With each meeting, I let out a little more, framing my marriage troubles as hypotheticals looking for advice without making myself too vulnerable. Eric listened carefully, never judging, always guiding the conversation back to self-respect and truth. As our friendship grew, an idea began to form. I needed someone on my side. Someone outside my normal circle, who didn't have any history with Anna or our mutual friends. Having Eric as a new presence in my life felt like building a quiet safety net. I began to notice how naturally he fit into any social setting, making small talk with ease, able to read a room as if he'd known everyone for years. It wasn't long before I started bringing him up in conversation with Anna, dropping his name here and there, mentioning stories from work that involved him. She seemed politely interested, but there was always a hint of curiosity, or maybe even suspicion, whenever I spoke about Eric. That was exactly what I wanted. Steadily, Eric became a secret part of my plan, not only as a friend, but as a silent witness to the truth I was preparing to reveal. By growing this new friendship, I made sure that when the right moment came, Anna would never see it coming. Anna went on as if nothing in our lives had changed. She moved through our days with the same routines and reassurances, seemingly untouched by the distance that had grown between us. Each morning she'd ask about my schedule, plan dinners, and suggest little outings for the weekend. She'd come home in the evenings with stories, sometimes real, sometimes rehearsed, sprinkling kisses on my cheek, relaxing into our evening rituals as if she had left all secrets at the door. Her laughter returned, echoing through the apartment, and she never missed a chance to poke fun at my bad jokes or tease me about my habit of burning toast. Watching her was like witnessing someone play a perfect part, delivering every line just right, making it harder to believe the truth was already out in the open. I realized just how skilled she'd become at hiding, how easy it was for her to pretend that our world was still whole, even as it quietly fell apart behind her smile. I often wondered how she managed to keep up such an act without slipping. Maybe she thought she was clever enough, or maybe she trusted that I'd never look too closely at the cracks. I was careful never to hint at what I knew, never letting a flicker of suspicion cross my face, and this only seemed to make her more comfortable. She stopped clutching her phone so tightly, started leaving it out when she was in the other room again, acting as though there was nothing in the world to hide. Sometimes she talked about our future, about trips we might take or changes we could make to the apartment. Beneath it all, I saw the small gestures, how she avoided details in her stories, how her eyes darted away when a certain topic got too close to the truth. But day after day, Anna lived her double life undisturbed, soothing her guilt with carefully chosen words and affection, not realizing the stage was quietly being set for everything to come crashing down. I began to take careful steps so Anna would feel even more at ease around me. Almost too at ease. I stopped asking about her late nights altogether, and never mentioned the unexplained absences or the strange messages from unfamiliar names. When she canceled plans with me or came home smelling of someone else's perfume, I shrugged it off and made excuses for her. I even suggested she spend more time out with friends, which she accepted with a relieved smile, thinking I had finally returned to the easygoing husband she counted on. If she offered a vague explanation, I acted satisfied straight away. I returned her kisses, asked about her day without digging for details, and let our routines become relaxed and familiar again. I even started planning little weekend activities, pretending to be as invested in our future as ever, which seemed to put her guard down just a bit further each time. The more comfortable Anna felt, the less she covered her tracks. She barely bothered to hide her phone during dinner, sometimes leaving it unattended while she ran to the store or into the shower. I watched closely, but never acted suspicious, never pried more than necessary. In the evenings, I played the part of the doting husband, bringing her snacks while she watched TV, rubbing her shoulders when she said she was tired. I was patient, never rushing or forcing the reveal, letting her become used to the idea that I was blind to everything. For her, it must have felt like all the tension had finally faded. She laughed louder, hugged me tighter, and allowed herself to get back to the carefree Anna she used to be around me. But all the while, I was just waiting, ready for the day when her relaxed confidence would give me the final pieces I needed for the truth to show itself without any doubt. Outside, I was the picture of calm. I let every routine play out as if nothing dark was happening beneath the surface. I smiled in the mornings, made silly jokes over breakfast, and left goodnight notes by her pillow just like I used to. Whenever she looked at me, she saw the familiar, steady version of the man she married, someone dependable and forgiving. When friends visited, I laughed at her stories and played host, never showing a flicker of doubt or resentment. If Anna found me lost in thought, I always had a believable excuse ready. Something at work, a bill I forgot to pay, a funny memory from the weekend. I even practiced steadying my voice in the mirror, making sure that if she suddenly questioned me, there wouldn't be a tremor to give me away. All the while, I was careful to never act cold or distant, never hint at the storm that raged just under my skin. Inside, though, it was chaos. Every fake smile felt like a fresh bruise. Every quiet moment was filled with questions and anger, and each time I looked at her, I replayed all her little lies in my mind. I'd catch myself clenching my fists at night, or gripping the edge of the sink in the bathroom until my knuckles turned white. My thoughts would race, jumping from hope that maybe it was all a mistake to certainty that our marriage was built on a lie. The hardest part was staying silent. I wanted so badly to shout the truth and demand answers, to let her see just how much she had hurt me. But I pushed those urges down, day after day, knowing I had to wait for the right moment. My calmness became a mask, a shield protecting both myself and my plan. No matter how badly I hurt on the inside, I convinced everyone, including Anna, that I was just fine, hiding the hurricane that threatened to break through at any second. Eric was nothing like the people Anna usually met through our circles. He was sharp, thoughtful, and unusually perceptive. He wore his life experiences with quiet confidence, quick to listen and slow to speak. Every time we met, he asked meaningful questions, not the usual small talk, but things that made you reflect. He was well liked at work, but not flashy. He blended into a room, gathering details and forming careful opinions, before sharing his own point of view. Over many coffees, I learned that he valued honesty above all else. People trusted Eric, which worked in my favor. His kindness was genuine, but there was a subtle toughness beneath it, a sense he could see through masks, even ones worn as tightly as Anna's. When he offered advice, it was calm and measured. He never tried to pressure me, and he never asked for more than I wanted to share. With time, he became more than a colleague. He became my anchor in the whirlwind I was hiding. Using Eric as the pivot for my plan was something I considered carefully. I needed someone Anna wouldn't suspect, someone completely outside her radar but credible enough not to raise eyebrows if he appeared at a dinner or social gathering. Eric was perfect. He was new enough not to be tangled in our personal history, but trustworthy enough to hold his own if things got tense. I started telling Anna more about him, how he was supportive, how he valued truth, how he always seemed to know what people were really feeling. I painted a picture of him as someone both interesting and important to me. The goal was simple. I wanted to ease her into the idea of his presence, to get her used to his name. When I finally did invite him to meet Anna, I knew she'd feel only the smallest hint of suspicion, likely seeing him as just a harmless new friend of mine. But in truth, Eric would play a central role in revealing what needed to be seen. Subtle, honest, and undeniable. One Thursday afternoon, while Anna was sorting through her work emails on the sofa, I suggested we go out for dinner that weekend. I pitched it as something special, said we deserved a break from cooking and the silent meals we'd grown used to at home. I watched her face as she weighed her reply, glancing at her calendar app before smiling and saying yes. There was nothing unusual in my tone or in my request. I kept it light, mentioning I'd made a reservation at a new place we'd talked about before but never tried. Anna played along perfectly, nodding as if she was looking forward to it, asking if I wanted to invite anyone else or keep it between us. I shrugged and said I might ask Eric, my new friend from work, just for a change of pace, maybe to help us through any awkward silences over dessert. She laughed, agreeing that it would be fun to meet someone new. If she felt anything odd about the dinner or my mood, she didn't show it. She looked comfortable and maybe even relieved, convinced that I was just planning another ordinary night out. The day of the dinner, I did everything to keep up the act. I went about my morning routine, made coffee the way she liked, and left her favorite playlist running in the car as we drove across town to the restaurant. I asked her about her week, listened as she told me a long story about a client at work, and responded with the same quiet enthusiasm I always had. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't waver, even though deep down I knew what was about to unfold. On the surface, it was just another night, a couple going out to dinner, trying to recover a spark. But inside I was focused on every detail, knowing this was the night everything would finally begin to shift. Anna chatted about silly little things, acting completely at ease, while I kept the nerves and the storm in my head hidden away. As we walked into the restaurant together, she had no idea this would become the evening that changed everything. Anna and I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early. The place was softly lit, with tables tucked into private corners and the gentle clink of cutlery blending with quiet music. I had timed things so that Eric would meet us there, telling Anna he'd join a little after we settled in. We sat down and ordered drinks, with Anna making light conversation about the menu and the friendly staff. But I could see something different in her eyes, a little curiosity, maybe even excitement, at the idea of meeting someone new in my life. When Eric walked in, he moved with a calm confidence, scanning the room until he found us. I stood and waved him over, trying to keep everything relaxed and pleasant. I watched Anna closely as she realized this was the friend I'd mentioned, noticing the quick flicker of surprise on her face, quickly smoothed over by a polite smile. I introduced them as naturally as possible, complimenting Eric on his sense of humor and saying how helpful he'd been at work. Anna reached out to shake his hand, her posture straightening just a bit, her expression neutral but searching. Eric greeted her warmly, easy and polite, making a joke about being nervous to keep up with our legendary dinner conversations. They both laughed, though Anna's laugh was just a little too bright, her smile a touch too controlled. It was subtle, but I could feel a shift in the energy at the table. Anna wasn't expecting him. She had no reason to think this evening was anything but a break from routine, yet suddenly she was on guard. She listened to Eric talk about his hometown and job, fidgeted with her napkin, and nodded along. From the outside, we must have looked like friends enjoying a meal, but underneath, the game had already begun. I kept my tone gentle, almost playful, as if nothing at all was out of the ordinary. I will never forget the look on Anna's face the moment she realized who was joining us for dinner. She tried to play it cool, but it was all in her eyes. At first, she was all polite smiles, expecting the usual small talk and friendly banter. When Eric first walked up, I saw her surprise flash across her features, a split second of confusion, eyes widening just a bit, her lips parting as if to ask a question before she caught herself and smoothed her expression. She looked from me to Eric, searching for clues in our body language, trying to piece together why I'd invited him here and what their meeting meant. Her voice was steady enough when she greeted him, but I noticed her grip on the napkin tightened, the edges twisting between her fingers. As the evening went on, Anna's confusion lingered just beneath her polite mask. She listened closely to everything Eric said, her eyes darting between the two of us, as if she was looking for hints or secret messages being passed right under her nose. There was a subtle stiffness in her posture she couldn't hide, her usual calm confidence replaced by a quiet anxiety. She smiled at Eric's jokes a second too late, and her laugh was missing the easy warmth I'd known for so long. Every now and then, her gaze would land on me, searching for reassurance or an explanation that I never offered. I watched her try to regain control, hoping she could steer the conversation back to familiar ground, but she could never quite shake the feeling that something was off. That look of surprise and confusion at having a stranger suddenly dropped into our private world was exactly what I'd hoped to see. A crack in the routine, proof that she no longer controlled the story. Dinner turned into a careful game of words, every sentence loaded with double meanings and hidden tests. Eric eased into the conversation with his calm, steady presence, asking Anna about her work, her hobbies, and the places she liked to visit around town. He listened closely to her answers, sometimes repeating back her words or asking her to explain a little more, as if savoring each detail. Anna did her best to keep things light, rattling off stories about her coworkers and favorite movies, but every now and then her guard slipped. I watched the way she hesitated before answering even innocent questions, glancing at me for some sign of how to play things. When Eric asked how we met, Anna told the same story she always did, but her voice was softer than usual, her eyes flicking away twice before she finished. The tension was just under the surface, visible in the way we all smiled a little too much and avoided talking over each other's words. I joined in, acting as if the evening was ordinary, but sliding in small details that only Anna and I understood. Things about late nights and surprise changes in plans, all presented like inside jokes. Eric picked up on my cues, joking about how relationships survive on honesty and trust, his tone friendly, but with an edge just sharp enough to get Anna's attention. She shifted in her seat, cheeks flushing as she tried to laugh along, but her eyes said she felt the pressure. There was an unspoken challenge in the air, every pause between words heavy with the things we weren't saying outright. Anna tried a few times to steer the conversation safely away from anything personal, but I kept guiding it back, careful to never be obvious, always smiling as if nothing was wrong. By dessert, I could see the lines of worry etched across Anna's face, and I knew she could feel that something, somehow, was closing in. I started to drop little hints into the conversation. Nothing obvious, but just enough that only Anna would notice. I mentioned a few of her late work nights, saying how I'd grown used to the sound of her coming in after midnight. I said it with a soft chuckle, as if it was an inside joke, but I was watching her carefully. She laughed along, but there was a pause, a flicker in her eyes, before she responded. Then I started telling Eric little stories about changes in our routines, about how Anna sometimes disappeared with her phone, or how her favorite cafe kept coming up in conversation, even though I'd never seen her go there. Each time, Anna's smile looked more forced, her voice just a little tighter. Her hands fidgeted with her glass of water, and she started picking at her food, barely touching her dinner, even though she usually loved eating out. As the night went on, I wove in more specific details, things Brian and Anna only talked about privately. I joked that sometimes couples know each other so well, they can always spot when the other is hiding something, even if no one else ever will. I watched Anna closely as I said this, saw the way she swallowed hard before replying that, yes, sometimes people can surprise you. The atmosphere at the table turned sharper, and I saw her glance between me and Eric, looking for any sign that this was more than just dinner. That's when I realized the power of holding the truth without revealing it outright. Anna was growing more tense by the minute, and in every careful pause and every sideways look, it was clear she sensed the ground shifting under her feet. By dropping those hints, I made her question what I knew, forcing her to play out 1,000 possible endings in her mind, and all of them led back to the one thing she wanted to keep hidden. By the time dessert arrived, Anna's calm was almost gone. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her spoon, and she kept looking down at her plate, barely tasting the food. Whenever she thought I wasn't watching, her eyes darted back and forth between Eric and me, searching for clues in our faces. There was none of her usual confidence, none of her easy laughter or casual teasing. Instead, I saw anxiety in the little ways she sat, her shoulders pulled up, her foot tapping under the table, her tight-lipped smile growing more strained with each passing minute. She almost knocked over her glass, muttering a shaky apology. When Eric asked another gentle question about trust in relationships, Anna's answer was quiet, brittle, as if her words might crack if she wasn't careful. The silence that should have felt comfortable now pressed in on her. She kept glancing at me, frowning slightly whenever I smiled too long or spoke too casually about our routine. I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes. She realized something was off, that I was no longer the oblivious husband she believed she could fool. Anna's face grew pale, and her responses shorter, her stories messier, sometimes contradicting things she'd said earlier in the night. She started touching her phone more, but never pulled it out, probably afraid of what might accidentally be revealed in front of Eric. The more I maintained my calm, the more uncertain and nervous she became. It was clear now that Anna felt exposed, like she'd just realized she was standing on thin ice and couldn't tell how deep the water was beneath her. The mask she'd worn for so long was slipping, and she was starting to understand that I'd seen behind it all along. Eric was careful, but he knew exactly how to push the conversation in those subtle, uncomfortable directions. He never accused Anna of anything, but he dropped small comments that seemed harmless on the surface, yet landed with a quiet sting for her. He brought up stories about people who lost trust in their partners, and how honesty always has a way of bubbling up whether you like it or not. He told a story about a friend who pretended for months nothing was wrong at home, until everything fell apart in a single night. Anna tried to laugh it off, but her smile barely touched her eyes. Eric locked eyes with her as he asked gentle questions like, "Do you ever feel like someone just knows you too well? Not because of love, but because of the secrets you try to keep?" Each time, Anna's answers stumbled, and her fingers nervously traced circles on the tablecloth. The more Eric spoke, the more Anna's discomfort grew. He talked about how some secrets are just waiting for the right moment to come out, no matter how hard you try to keep them buried. He didn't say anything about her directly, but he didn't need to. The room felt heavy with meaning hidden in every sentence, and Anna grew quiet, offering clipped responses and avoiding Eric's gaze. Eric just smiled slightly, calm and polite, as if he was simply making conversation. But his words lingered in the air, circling the table like a quiet warning Anna couldn't quite escape. I watched her shrink into herself a little more each time he spoke, the room that had felt so safe at the start of the night slowly closing in around her. She looked at me, searching for help or reassurance, but I gave her neither. Instead, I simply nodded along with Eric, letting her know without words that she couldn't hide the truth forever. Anna's emotions shifted so quickly, it felt like watching a storm roll over the table. At first, as Eric kept talking in those carefully veiled terms, I caught a flash of anger in her eyes. She wasn't angry at Eric, not really. Her gaze focused on me, as if daring me to finally say what I knew. Her lips pressed tightly together, her jaw clenched, and for a moment she seemed ready to snap, maybe to accuse me or tell me to drop whatever game I was playing. But just as quickly as the anger appeared, it faded to something more fragile. Her hands trembled. I could see fear growing behind her eyes, a deep worry that everything was finally falling apart and there'd be no way to rebuild what she'd broken. She started fidgeting with her ring, blinking hard, staring down at the half-melted ice in her glass. Then came the last trick, an attempt to regain some sense of control over the night. Anna leaned into sweetness, turning her attention to me with soft eyes and a gentle voice, as if trying to remind me of better days. She thanked me for inviting Eric, said it was so good to see me make new friends, and squeezed my hand with that practiced affection she thought would win me back to her side. But underneath, I could see the calculation, the way she tried to read my reactions, desperate for reassurance that her world hadn't been entirely upended. She tossed out little jokes, tried to shift the conversation onto harmless memories, made shallow plans for future dinners together. Every move was a test, a way to see if she could still steer me, still mold the situation to make herself safe. But I watched her calmly, knowing I wouldn't be moved by charm, fear, or anger. Not anymore. She couldn't find her footing, and her methods that had always worked before kept failing her, one by one, as the truth slowly closed in. Throughout that entire dinner, I held my ground. I never slipped, never broke the calm exterior I'd practiced for so long. No matter what Anna said, no matter how hard her eyes searched mine for answers or confessions, I stayed steady. If she pressed me for details or tried to draw out what I knew, I responded gently, with vague reassurances and a quiet smile. I never brought up the evidence I'd gathered. I didn't accuse or confront, not once. Instead, my every word was just ambiguous enough that she couldn't pin anything on me, not a single clue that I was moments away from exposing everything if I chose. I let Eric handle the more pointed questions, acting as though I was only there to share a pleasant meal. To anyone watching, I was just a loving husband surrounded by friends, perfectly content with exactly where he was. Inside, though, I was sharper than ever. I could feel Anna getting desperate. Her tone kept changing, shifting from gentle to sharp and back again, but I refused to let her control the moment. I kept steering the conversation away from anything that might give her a handle to grab onto, never letting her lead me into an argument or emotional scene. If she made a plea for understanding, I'd just nod, meeting her gaze with careful patience and nothing more. At times, our eyes locked, and I saw her beg for some kind of conclusion, but I never offered it. My silence became the answer in itself, a boundary she couldn't cross no matter how she twisted the story. By not confirming or denying anything, I gave her nothing to fight against and nothing to cling to. She was left to sit with the uncertainty, the fear that her secrets were no longer safe, unable to find a way out. That, in the end, was the most powerful response I could have given her. By the time we reached the end of the dinner, it felt like the entire table was buzzing with things left unsaid. The lights seemed dimmer, the restaurant quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eric made one last, careful remark about how some mistakes can never be hidden forever, and how, sooner or later, the truth finds its way to the surface. There was a long, heavy silence afterward. Anna stared straight at her plate, her shoulders tense. I looked at her and for the first time all evening allowed a small sadness to show in my eyes, just enough for her to see that I knew exactly what she'd been hiding. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine, and for a split second all the lies between us sat there, heavy and exposed, needing no words at all. It was a confrontation without shouts, a confession without voices. In those few quiet seconds, everything fell apart and came into view. Anna's face crumpled, her confidence gone, her mouth opening and then closing again, searching for an excuse she couldn't find. I never said a word. I let the silence speak, let her see the resignation and disappointment in my expression, the look that told her I'd seen the truth and would never unsee it. Eric excused himself to make a call outside, giving us that final space. At that moment, the hurt and betrayal no longer needed to be spelled out. The air was filled with what she had done, and she could feel it all around her. Anna dropped her head, blinking fast, and drew a shaky breath. She tried to speak, to start an apology, maybe, or spin some new reason, but I just shook my head softly. The truth had been exposed, quietly and completely, and nothing was ever going to be the same between us again. After Eric stepped outside and the silence settled over our table, Anna made one last, desperate effort to take back control. She straightened in her chair, brushed at her eyes, and tried to rally her usual charm. Her words tumbled out quickly, apologies mixed with excuses, weak explanations about busy schedules, stresses at work, and misunderstandings I must have had. She reached across the table for my hand, her grip shaky but insistent, her eyes searching mine for a hint of forgiveness or something she could use to pull me back into her story. She spoke as if she could fix everything by sheer force of will, filling the air with empty promises that things would get better, that we could get back what we had. But every word seemed to land with less and less weight, bouncing off the thick wall of truth now standing plain between us. The more she pleaded, the more she seemed to realize she was fighting a battle she had already lost. Her confident smile was gone, replaced by the trembling voice of someone who had run out of lies to tell. She confessed bits and pieces, but never the full truth, talking in circles until her voice cracked and her eyes filled with frustrated tears. For the first time, I saw not the woman who had fooled me, but someone who was afraid and overwhelmed, caught in the fallout of her own choices. Every attempt to twist the story, to shift blame or rewrite the past, chipped away at what little strength she thought she had left. Her desperation was clear. She couldn't face what she'd done, or the quiet power I held now simply by seeing her as she truly was. Anna's last attempts to gain the upper hand fell away, and she slumped back in her seat, beaten by her own guilt and the silence that refused to offer comfort. As Anna's words fell quiet, I realized I didn't need to argue anymore. I didn't need to plead or ask for reasons or try to untangle all the old lies. Instead, I found a strange kind of strength in that silence. I looked at her, calm and steady, and let her see that I was done being the man who waited for her explanation or chased after excuses. The years I had spent believing in us, giving her my trust, and quietly suffering through her betrayals. They had shaped me, yes, but not in the way she expected. Now, I was stronger for having survived. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady and clear. I told her that I knew, that I'd seen enough, and that her web of stories would never work on me again. I didn't raise my voice or make threats. I simply let the truth stand on its own, taking its place at our table like a final guest. Anna stared at me, shocked by my calm, realizing that the old power she held over me, my hope and my weakness, was gone. I could see her searching for a reaction, any sign that her pleas or tears could soften me. But I was different now. I told her quietly that I would not spend another day living in someone else's shadow. I told her that I deserved respect and honesty, and that the part of me who waited and believed blindly was finished for good. There was no drama, no demand for suffering. I wasn't cruel, but I was unyielding. I felt the burden of all those doubting nights fall away. For the first time in so long, I saw myself as the one in control, not over her decisions, but over my own story. Anna's presence, once so powerful in my world, was suddenly small against the peace I felt in finally choosing myself. Anna's voice grew weaker as she tried to explain herself. She talked about how lonely she'd been lately, how she felt invisible and unappreciated at times, or how she didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. Her words tumbled out one after another, jumping from excuses to apologies and back again. She blamed work stress, the pressures of married life, and even asked if maybe I could have tried harder to notice how unhappy she was. With every sentence, her explanations felt more empty. There was no conviction left in her voice, only desperation, a kind of hope that if she just kept talking, she might find a reason that made everything make sense, or at least made me soften. But as she spoke, I saw her realize that nothing she said could fill the space between us anymore. Her words didn't reach me, no matter how heartfelt or frantic they sounded. I listened quietly, letting her finish every thought, but the truth was that I no longer needed to hear her reasons. Her long explanations just rang hollow, the kind of story told too many times to ever truly be believed again. There was no passion behind her justifications, nothing but the ache of someone who knew she'd lost her grip on the narrative. As her voice faded and she ran out of words, the silence grew thick between us. I met her exhausted, desperate gaze with gentle finality, understanding for the first time that I could hear her without having to forgive her, and that her excuses could never rebuild what her secrets had shattered. Sitting there across from Anna in that quiet, heavy silence, I finally let myself really feel it all. The betrayal wasn't just about her seeing someone else. It was about the trust that had held us together, those hundreds of small moments that made marriage worth the work. I thought about every early morning we shared coffee, and every night we held each other close, all the mundane routines that now felt tainted with doubt. The memories weren't ruined, but they had changed into something bittersweet. I was grieving not only the woman in front of me, but also the simple faith I'd had in our life together, the peace I'd felt just knowing I was safe with her. The pain was deep and raw, like something had been carved out of me, replaced by a cold emptiness I didn't know how to fill. I realized I could miss her and still feel anger, could remember the best parts of our story and still know it was truly over. And maybe that's the real loss, the part that aches the most. I could see her talking, searching my face, but I couldn't meet her halfway anymore. I'd lost the ability to trust her, and that loss felt like losing a piece of myself. I hated the questions that lived inside me now. Questions about when the lies began, how long she had been hiding, whether anything we'd built together was ever fully honest. That doubt seeped into everything, poisoning even my own memories and sense of judgment. I felt smaller after what happened, but I also felt strangely clear. It hurt more than I ever thought was possible, but in that pain was something honest, a truth that no excuse could dress up or disguise. For the first time, I accepted that I couldn't fix what was broken between us, and that moving forward would mean letting go of the hope I'd clung to for so long. I didn't need to make some big speech or threaten to walk out. The truth was clear, in my eyes, in my voice, in the way I picked up my jacket and nodded for her to gather her things. Anna looked at me, searching for something, but I kept myself steady and calm, quietly letting her know this was different now. I thanked her for coming to dinner, my tone gentle but final. There was a pause where she seemed to hope I'd say that everything could go back to normal if we just tried hard enough, but I didn't give her that answer. Instead, I just offered a quiet, "Let's go," holding open the door as we stepped outside into the night. We didn't touch each other or talk much on the walk to the car. The air between us felt empty, stripped of possibility, the old rhythm gone for good. Driving home, I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my eyes fixed on the road. Anna sat beside me in silence, maybe replaying every moment from dinner in her mind, maybe wishing she could find some way to change what had been set in motion. I didn't have to spell it out. She knew as well as I did that the curtain had fallen on the life we once shared. For me, every unspoken word between us said more than 1,000 arguments ever could. I realized that the real power wasn't in making her confess or shouting about my pain. It was in quietly standing on my own, showing that my trust, once given freely, was no longer there to be used. By the time we reached home, it was clear neither of us could pretend any longer. The chapter had ended, and we crossed that threshold both knowing things would never, ever be the same. When we stepped out of the restaurant, Eric stood a little ways off, talking quietly on his phone. He caught my eye, gave me a knowing nod, and politely said goodbye to Anna. Nothing more than that. There was no drawn-out farewell, no lingering sense that he'd stick around to offer her comfort or distraction. Anna looked at him with a kind of silent plea, but Eric made a quick, respectful exit and disappeared into the night, leaving the two of us alone on the empty sidewalk. With him gone, the buffer between us vanished too. She was left standing there, exposed to the heavy reality of what had just happened. There was no one left to impress or convince, no one to take her side or help her cover the cracks in her story. As I walked her to the car, I could feel the weight Anna now carried. Without Eric's presence, there was no escape from the fact that her secrets had finally come to light. She gripped her purse tightly, walking a step behind me, her gaze focused on the pavement. There were no more stories left to tell, no more clever words or familiar routines to hide behind. She was left alone under the harsh glow of the streetlights, her guilt finally settled onto her shoulders without anything to shield her from it. That drive home felt longer than any before, filled with a silence even thicker than the one at dinner. Every mile underlined what she already knew. She was left to face the consequences of her actions on her own, and for the first time, I was no longer the shield between her and her choices. I remember vividly the lowest point, the moment when my doubt and pain weighed more than anything else in my life. It was late one night, after Anna had left for one of her meetings, and the apartment felt colder than it ever had before. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the room silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, staring at nothing, lost in a spiral of questions. I replayed every moment I'd missed a sign, every night she'd come home late, every little smile that now seemed fake. I barely slept, my mind racing through possibilities. Was it my fault? Had I not been enough? I tortured myself with these questions until I felt like there was nothing left of me but regret and confusion. Some nights I just sat in the dark, not even bothering to turn on the lights, letting the loneliness sit heavy on my chest. It was during those nights that I felt truly powerless, smaller than I had ever thought possible. The betrayal had made me question everything, not just Anna, but my own sense of worth. I wondered what I'd done to deserve this, if I was to blame or if it was simply something broken in her that I could never fix. This emptiness seeped into every corner of my life. I stopped eating well, stopped enjoying things I used to love. I was running on anger and heartbreak, barely able to hold myself together when she was around. That was when I realized I had to find a way out, that waiting for an apology or searching for answers that would never come would only ruin me further. Hitting rock bottom forced me to see that my healing couldn't depend on her anymore. That's when something inside me shifted, quietly but completely, setting me on the path toward reclaiming my own strength. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come since those sleepless nights and endless doubts. Now, I wake up and the silence in the house doesn't suffocate me anymore. It's peaceful, even comforting. I stopped waiting for Anna to come through the door or for her explanations to change my mind. Little by little, I learned to savor my own company again. I started making my own plans on the weekends, reaching out to old friends, even rediscovering old hobbies I'd pushed aside to make space for our life together. At first it was hard, every small step feeling heavy with the weight of the past, but with each day I gained back a piece of the self I'd lost. My reflection in the mirror went from tired and anxious to someone stronger, someone who didn't need anyone's approval to know his own worth. With that sense of independence came a new confidence. I found myself setting boundaries easily, saying no to what hurt me, and yes to what made me feel alive again. I realized I was more than a betrayed partner. I was someone who could rebuild, who could choose honesty and respect for myself, no matter what anyone else did. Friends noticed the change, saying I seemed lighter, even happier. I caught myself smiling for no reason sometimes, just happy to have my peace back. Even little things like making breakfast or going for a walk in the park became sources of joy again, not reminders of what I'd lost. I'd learned firsthand that surviving heartbreak isn't about erasing the pain, but about realizing you're still whole, even with scars. And as I built this new chapter alone, I trusted myself again, with no more secrets, no more pretending, just me, stronger and finally free. Anna couldn't escape the fallout from what happened. In the weeks after everything came out, you could see how the truth slowly unraveled her old routines and friendships. The story of our breakup made its way through our circle, even though neither of us had wanted to talk publicly about what really happened. People noticed my absence from her social media, the last-minute cancellations she made, and the change in her energy at gatherings. Friends who had once been close to both of us began to keep their distance, uncomfortable with the tension and unsure which side to take. Some reached out privately to ask if I was okay, while others sent her polite messages but never really met her eyes in public. At work, Anna threw herself into projects, but the weight of the rumors lingered just under the surface, colleagues giving her polite, cautious greetings instead of real conversation. But the hardest consequences for Anna weren't social, they were emotional. Without the safety net of our marriage, Anna had to sit with what she'd done, and I saw how much she struggled with that. Her laughter at parties never reached her eyes anymore, and the confident sparkle she'd once carried seemed dulled. Sometimes I'd catch her lost in thought, shoulders slumped, knowing she was replaying all those difficult nights and empty apologies. She tried to repair some connections, but trust, once lost, proved hard to win back. Clearly, she was living with the knowledge that her own choices had put her here. Even when surrounded by friends or family, there was a distance, a sense that something vital had shut down inside her. She learned the same lesson I had, in a different way, that the truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, the consequences don't just fade with time. The past lingers, and the only way forward is to truly face what you've done. Now that enough time has passed, I find myself thinking often about how everything played out. In the end, there was no big fight, no shouting match, no dramatic public scene. The truth surfaced in the quietest way possible, through gentle questions and silent looks, with the evidence exposed but not thrown in anyone's face. I realized that sometimes real justice isn't about revenge or wrecking someone's life in return for what they did to you. It's about letting them see exactly what their choices cost them, and stepping away with your dignity still intact. Watching Anna come undone not through arguments, but from the slow unraveling of her own lies, was more powerful than any showdown could have been. I didn't need to humiliate her or get the last word. The consequences of her actions did all the work for me. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing I didn't have to use anger or threats to get closure. By keeping my silence, by letting her reveal herself without me forcing the issue, I found a version of justice that was quieter, but far more lasting. Poetic, really, that the one thing Anna tried so hard to hide became the very thing that changed everything for her. But this time, she was left to deal with the fallout on her own. As for me, I learned that the truth has a way of shaping its own ending, especially if you have the patience to let it. My healing didn't come from making her suffer. It came from taking back my story, my voice, and my peace. Nothing about that chapter was easy, but I look back and know I wouldn't have wanted it to end any other way. Sometimes, justice is served in silence, and it's even sweeter for it. Looking back, I know that truth and patience were the only weapons I ever needed. I never needed to yell, to dig up every last detail, or to make a scene just to prove a point. Instead, I trusted what I saw and waited for the right moment, using silence as my shield. It wasn't easy. Keeping all those feelings inside, anger, disappointment, heartbreak, while pretending that everything was normal, took more strength than I knew I had. But that patience gave me the time to see things clearly, to step back and let the truth reveal itself. In the end, Anna's own actions brought the truth into the light. I let her show the world who she really was, and that was all the justice anyone needed. I learned that the real power in these moments doesn't come from trying to force a confession or get even. It comes from letting the truth stand on its own, unshakable and undeniable. Now, when I think about everything we went through, I feel proud, not of the pain, but of the way I handled it. I didn't let her choices turn me into someone bitter or vengeful. The patience I had, even when it hurt, let me hold on to who I was. That patience, paired with the truth, was stronger than any anger I could have thrown at her. The truth didn't just end our story, it set me free to start a new one on my own terms. If there's anything I hope people take from what happened, it's that you don't always need to fight the loudest to win. Sometimes the quietest path, the one where you trust yourself and the truth, is where real strength lives. That's what got me through the hardest days, and what lets me move forward now, free from the lies that once held me down. It's strange how quiet peace can feel once the storm passes. For months, my life was filled with tension, waiting for the truth to surface and for the pain to stop. But after it was all over and the dust settled, I noticed a calm inside me that I had never felt before. I used to wake up with heavy thoughts, my heart racing at small reminders of what I'd lost. Now I found myself enjoying the simple things again, making my own breakfast, taking evening walks in the cool air, even just sitting in silence with a book. The restlessness that haunted me was finally gone. My mind wasn't racing with questions anymore. I didn't need to look over my shoulder or second-guess every word spoken at home. For the first time in a long time, I was content simply being by myself, at peace in my own company. Peace didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it hadn't hurt. It meant accepting all that I'd been through, letting those memories take their place in my story without controlling it. I learned to breathe deeper, to sleep through the night without waking up in panic. I wasn't waiting for an apology or hoping to turn back time. Instead, I took comfort in knowing that I'd been honest with myself and patient with the truth. That sense of peace was better than anything I thought I could feel after so much heartbreak. I realized I was stronger and wiser, and that quiet strength was something no one could take from me, no matter what happened in the past. As I stepped forward into new days, I carried that peace as proof that I'd survived not only the betrayal, but also my own darkest moments. If there's one lesson that sticks with me after everything, it's this: nobody gets away with lies forever. Secrets might hide for months or even years, but they always find their way out. Sometimes all at once, other times sinking in slow, layer by layer, until there's nothing left to cover them. I think back on the days when I would have done anything just to keep the peace, to believe in Anna's stories and wish for the best. But hiding from the truth only made the fall worse when it finally came. The universe, it seems, has its own quiet way of balancing things out. You can run from consequences, you can pretend everything is fine, but reality is stubborn. It waits for the right moment and makes sure no lie goes unseen forever. I hope anyone listening to my story remembers this. Truth has a way of surviving anything. Even when it hurts, even when it feels like it'll break you apart, it has a power that outlasts even the most carefully constructed lies. I stepped out of my marriage scarred, but also clear-eyed and stronger than before. I know now that my patience and honesty weren't weaknesses. They were the very things that set me free. Betrayal leaves marks, but no one escapes its reach. Not the person betrayed, and not the one who betrays. In the end, the truth rises, and sooner or later, it demands to be faced. That's the peace I carry with me now, and that's the legacy of this story. Nobody can hide the truth forever, and nobody gets away with deception in the end.